Welcome to URP 4741 and URP 6742. Today's lecture, we're going to talk about the privately owned rental housing built with federal subsidy. So this is from the supply side to consider the housing units which were built with the help of federal subsidies. Basically, we're going to talk about a few of the mortgage subsidy programs and also the Section 8 new construction substantial rehabilitation program, and also their affordability preservation challenges, because many of their programs, once the subsidies expire, their landlords or the developers, they have their right to convert those units to market rate. So how do we preserve them is a huge challenge. And also we're going to offer some overview of privately owned assisted stock. Please take note that most of those programs already they are no longer in effect. So that means Congress has already terminated those programs, but the housing stock still exists from those programs. There are three major subsidy programs. The first one is called a Section 221D3. The next one is Section 236, and the third one is a 515. Among the three programs, only the Section 515 still operates today. It's under the U.S. Department of Agriculture, so this program. But Section 221D3 and 236, they were supervised by HUD before Congress terminated those first two programs. So Section 221D3 pretty much just offers their 3% mortgages to private developers, and those mortgages, they are insured by Federal Housing Administration (FHA), and also they are below market rate, but usually at 3%. And so basically the private lenders, they are the middlemen, and the mortgages were sold to Fannie Mae. And this program is short-lived, was because people find that Congress finds that it's not very cost-effective, but still it did provide 184,000 units in total. And the reason for terminating the programs are mostly because those units, they were not affordable to families at the lower end of the income category, and so that basically is opposite to what the goals want to achieve. And also they are very expensive to the federal government. So once this program was terminated, they started another program. It's called Section 236. And for this program, the subsidy covers the difference in interests and other debt service costs between a market rate mortgage and mortgage charging interest rate of 1%. Like, for example, if the developer secured a market rate mortgage at the interest rates of 6%, and then the 5% of the interest will be covered by Section 236 subsidies. And this would make it possible to lower the rent and more affordable to lower income families. The rent is usually determined by 1% mortgage operating costs and limited 6% dividend to the owner. However, this program is actually more expensive compared to Section 212D3. And that also one of the major reasons that it was terminated by Congress as well in 1973. Section 515 was established in 1962 and still exists today. However, the funding has decreased over the years. It's mostly focusing on rural rental housing assistance. And they provide the developers with 1% interest loans with a term of 50 years. And 75% of the projects also receive rent subsidies. Like, for example, this also applied to the Section 236 and Section 212D as well. Under all three programs, many of the projects also receive rent subsidies. That means direct subsidies would be given to the developers or to the tenants, but mostly to the developers. Those programs didn't really perform well, and also got really expensive, and also the oil crisis and also the rising interest rates and some other inflation in the 1970s made it very costly to run those programs, and also many of the owners, they run into financial trouble, and many defaulted. And also even though the risks have been transferred or shifted to the federal government and investors in the secondary mortgage market. However, those programs proved not very effective. So that means those also, along with the Section 8 project-based assistance programs, those programs, once the owners pay off the mortgage early, they can convert the units into market rate. And also for the Section 8 contracts, usually it's like 15 years and 30 years later on. If those contracts expired, and then how do you really make sure the housing will be affordable? So those are the key issues that face those programs. And after the termination of the mortgage assistance programs in HUD, like Section 236 and Section 212D, Congress established another program. It's called Section 8 New Construction and the Substantial Rehabilitation Program. This program directly provides rental subsidy for the tenants paid to owners, and therefore, it's paid to the owners. Most of the subsidy paid to the owners. Okay. The project, it's project-based, because it's mostly focusing on preserving the rental housing. The tenants, they don't have the flexibility of holding a voucher and then they can find other places. They have to live in those Section 8 projects. However, direct rental subsidy was paid to the owners, which is the difference between 25% earlier and later 30% tenants adjusted income under the annual fair market rent. Like, for example, if the fair market rent, it's mostly paid monthly when they say annual, but it's broken down monthly. So the subsidy, like, for example, if the 30% of the tenants adjusted income is $300, and the fair market rent for the month is $1,500. In that case, their HUD would directly pay to the owners their $1,200. But remember, those owners are projects, Section 8 projects. Okay, so that means the tenants, they don't have the flexibility like the Section 8 vouchers. They can just move away from those Section 8 projects. Excuse me. And in this program also allows accelerated depreciation to offer incentives to their owner and developers regarding the less tax they would pay, which would offer incentives for them to stay in the program. And this program also is very costly, and also the program can cause concentration of poverty as well. and because it's project based. So that means the tenants just they go to those projects instead of they can find the housing. If they have a voucher, they can find the housing anywhere they would like to live, and if the voucher is accepted by the landlord. So this program was terminated as well. So many of the programs have been terminated, and new programs appear, and later I'm going to mention another major program still exists and functioning today. It's the Section 8 voucher program. But for those programs, even though they were terminated, they still left some units. Still, people still live in there, and also they need a maintenance because those programs were established in the 1960s, 70s. So that means the housing has deteriorated, and you need a constant maintenance, and so that the quality of the housing will be up to the standard. Another issue is, once the developers prepaid the mortgages, or once the contract for Section 8 project-based housing expired, the developers and the owners or landlords, they have the right to move the units to the market rate. So how do you really preserve those? Affordability is a major challenge. And this is the challenge not only for those programs, but also for any other project-based supply side subsidy programs. So affordability preservation, basically I mentioned before, mortgage prepayment, mortgage, once it's mature, like 50 years, 30 years, or maybe the Section 8 rental subsidy contract expired, and then the affordability would face their possibility to no longer be affordable. So under those conditions, there for older assisted stock, which were established under Section 221 D3 and Section 236, and there are a few responses from the federal government, and basically they try to prevent prepayment. So that means the developers or the owners, they cannot prepay. However, that caused a lot of discontent among the landlords and owners. So later on, they allowed the prepayment, and they try to use other ways to preserve affordability. So one of the ways is they use enhanced vouchers to help tenants to be affordable, to be able to afford like higher rent units. Enhanced vouchers basically means you don't have to follow the fair market rate. So like for example, if the landlords decided to increase their rent above the fair market rate, and then the tenants cannot pay and they're facing eviction, under that situation, if they get their enhanced voucher, they will be able to stay even though because the enhanced voucher will be able to pay their actual rent, the difference between actual rent and 30% of the tenant's income, adjusted income, even though the rent is higher than the fair market rate. Another initiative is called a markup to market, which allows some of the rent, like lower rents, which is lower than the market rate rent. Those units allow them to increase the rents up to 150% of the fair market rent, or even like higher, but have to be approved by HUD. Some other programs include like interest reduction, payment retention, and decoupling and stuff like that. That means the financial assistance to their owners and landlords, and also owners are allowed to keep excessive income, difference between adjusted rent and basic rent. In that case, give them more incentive to keep the housing affordable for low to moderate income renters. For Section 8, new construction and rehabilitation program, their threats to affordability preservation includes expiration of the contract, and also renewing the contract becomes costly. In that case, the federal government used the approach is called mark-to-market. Basically, they try to restructure their mortgage loans of the development into two different loans. The first one is based on operating income of their project. The second loan is owned by HUD and guaranteed by HUD, and the interest oftentimes they are not mandatory to be charged. In that case, then it can help their owners and the borrowers of the mortgage to be able to afford to pay back the mortgage, and so that can help preserve the affordability of those projects. Section 515 sorry, also faced similar threats as the other programs. The federal response is basically they use low-income housing tax credit as a tool to prioritize preservation of the Section 515 housing stock. And also they used a few other demonstration programs to give them to give landlords and owners incentives by restructuring the finance and the other things for multi-family housing projects, and also especially in rural areas. So as of 2020, there were 1.57 million units still remained in service from all those programs. HUD programs account for nearly 86%. By the way, I think the textbook made this number wrong, so it was like 70-something%, but based on my calculation, I think it's 86%. So HUD has a majority of those subsidized housing units still in service. And among HUD total program units, the largest portion was from the Section 8 new construction and the rehabilitation program. And then there are other programs, and also so Section 221D3 and Section 236, very small portion, 2.7%, and other properties. And Section 8 new construction and rehabilitation, and Section 8 has a little section about also its rehabilitation, part of the rehabilitation program. And then they have rental assistance demonstration program that is trying to provide direct rental subsidies to those projects. So those are the breakdown of the HUD program units for subsidized, privately owned housing. And before we conclude the lecture, I'm going to mention a few glossaries. The first one is household gross income. Another one is adjusted income. Gross income is often used as a basis for the rough estimate of affordability. However, when HUD is providing rental subsidies, or when HUD is calculating how much liability they pay to the landlords, the tenant's income oftentimes adjusted by considering dependents, child care, and also disability assistance, elderly, disabled family, and also medical expenses. In that case, the rent that those households owe will be much lower than based on the calculation of gross income. So the HUD rental subsidy rent based on the greater of 10% gross income and 30% of adjusted income, whichever greater HUD will pay for the difference between what the tenant can afford and the fair market rent. So let me know if you have any questions about this lecture.